Hello, everyone. Welcome back to FTF Coffee Breaks. Thank you for joining us for our episode today. Cat Got Your Data. I'm Maureen Lowe. I'm the founder and president of Finance Technologies Forum. So I'm having an echo here. Okay. I'm going to be one of your co-hosts today. I'm also joined by my trusted and one and only favorite Chief Content Officer, Eugene Grygo. You can see we're also joined by our special guests today. We have Shelley Bohlin from FINRA CAT and Judy McDonald from Susquehanna International Group. On this episode of FTF Coffee Breaks, we're talking about the very timely topic of the Consolidated Audit Trail, yet another regulation that has been postponed due to the pandemic, which seems to be a common theme on our Coffee Break series. And although it has been delayed a bit, yet again, the question still remains, has this been enough time for the industry to fully prepare? So we will be discussing this today, as well as what CAT means for the buy side. This has been a traditionally sell-side regulation, but it has become apparent that the buy side will also need to be involved as their data is reviewed by the regulators. So we will be discussing this as well, along with data security issues, various technologies, and cloud as it relates to CAT. So lots of very timely, interesting, somewhat controversial things, which always makes it fun to discuss today. Just a couple quick things to make note of. We did have a hurricane here on the East Coast, so some of us have lost internet connection. So if it gets a little wonky here or there, please bear with us, as our panelists some of them are working on hotspots. And this is also being recorded, so for anybody who wasn't able to view it live because of that, you'll be able to do so. You'll see that we are encouraging interaction from the attendees today. It does make for a much more lively discussion. Please feel free to share your thoughts with what we're saying or ask questions to our panel. This is your opportunity to get some of your questions answered in real time. We do know there are a lot of questions that still remain about this topic. So we're going to delve into the main discussions. I will be monitoring as best I can any questions coming in through our Zoom platform, as well as any of our live stream platforms that we are airing from today as well, and interjecting those. Eugene will be running the main topic. But before we get started, I just want to have our panelists just give a brief introduction of themselves. So Shelley, if you want to kick things off for us.
Sure. Thanks for having me this morning. I'm Shelley Bohlin. I serve as the Chief Operating Officer of FINRA CAT, and FINRA CAT serves as the plan processor. And my role, of course, is to ensure that FINRA CAT fulfills all of its obligations as the plan processor. And in particular, from an industry member perspective, to make sure that the industry members have all the tools, information, guidance that they need to meet all of their CAT reporting obligations.
Perfect. Thanks, Shelley. And Judy?
So thank you for having me. I've been an IT professional for over 25 years in the financial industry, including front, middle, and back office technology for privately held trading firms. In my role at SIG, I've been evaluating the Consolidated Audit Trail since its inception. Since February of 2017, I've served on the CAT Advisory Committee, and since March of 2019 served as the chair. I've also served as the co-chair in the industry member tech spec working group since its inception.
Perfect, thanks Judy. All right, Eugene, over to you in the hot seat.
Okay, great. The regulators have gotten the Consolidated Audit Trail surveillance project off the ground. Had a rocky start and had a few bumps in the road. Sell-side firms have started reporting transaction data. Exchanges and SROs have also been falling into line for this major data repository project. However, the CAT initiative has had several stones in the road since its inception. There have been, as Maureen has noted, there have been some pandemic-related deadline extension issues and concerns over the security of the data that firms are sending to exchanges and self-regulatory organizations. The data issue is something that buy-side firms need to be aware of because their trading patterns will be more in focus, and it's something that the buy-side firms will need to get a better grip on as we go forward. Let's kick things off. Shelley, I was wondering if you could give us a sense of the game-changing cross-market reach of this initiative.
Sure. So CAT really, as I'm sure most people are familiar with, came out of SEC rulemaking around the flash crash and the inability at that time for regulators to efficiently and quickly access trading data across all of the various markets in the US. So CAT, each of the national securities exchanges, equities and options, the trade reporting facilities that FINRA operates for over-the-counter transactions, and then of course, all of the order data from broker-dealers from the time they receive an order until the time it is ultimately executed by the broker-dealer or routed to an exchange for execution, and brings that all into a central database so regulators, the SEC and the SROs can access that data and have a holistic view of the US securities markets. So a couple big sort of game changers because currently regulators have a significant amount of data. FINRA, of course, has operated its OATS system for many years, which has broker-dealer data about equity orders, but not options orders. Of course, the FINRA does cross-market surveillance under RSAs for like 99% now, 100% of the equities markets, and a big portion of the options market. So regulators do have this information, have had this information for quite some time, but CAT brings it all together, all options data, all equities data, all in one place. And then, in addition to that, it brings in information about customer and account data that hasn't been there. That one of the real game changers is that allows regulators, the SEC, to identify the trading activity of a single customer of all markets in the US. So that's really the game changer of CAT, to allow them to track a single trader customer across all markets that they're trading on.
Then I guess from your perspective, could we get an update about some of the looming compliance deadlines?
Sure, absolutely. So the exchanges in FINRA have been reporting their data into CAT since November of 2018. There's a really good start already. But this year, 2020, is the year of the broker-dealer reporting, basically. And so equity started on June 22nd. We're phasing this in because, of course, it's very broad-reaching and complex and all the different kinds of order flow that exists. So we started June 22nd with the initial equity implementation, which is essentially OATS. So making sure that the OATS scope is covered, and then adding some proprietary order data that was not required in OATS market making data. And then July 20th was the first date that options reporting by broker-dealers began, and that was for simple electronic options. But there are many different validations that will be implemented as we move throughout the year. So we started with basic data integrity validations to make sure the broker-dealers can get the data in, it can be read. And then we'll start adding the more complicated linkage validations. So one thing, sort of, I guess, maybe going back to what is a game changer about CAT and what makes it so special for regulators is that it links all of the data from start to finish, from an order's origination through its ultimate execution or cancellation, regardless of the number of broker-dealers or marketplaces it may go across or be routed to. And each place along the way, linkages must be established, electronic linkages, so that you can create the complete life cycle from start to finish. So all of those linkages inside a single broker-dealer, like across desks, across departments inside a broker-dealer, then from one broker-dealer into another broker-dealer, there's linkages along the way. So we started with intra-firm Our next big thing will be inter-firm linkages. So broker-dealer A and broker-dealer B's data can be linked. And then, of course, linkages into the exchanges and into FINRA's TRF trade reporting facilities. So that by the end of this year for those initial implementations. So June 22nd, July 20th were very big. And then we're rolling into Interfirm next Monday. Actually, that'll go into production in a test mode. And then the compliance date will be October 26th. And then the final compliance date for options as well will be January 4th. So we've got a lot going on this year.
Then quickly, we do have a couple of questions from the registrants, from our listeners.
Yeah.
One was so if you want to take them, Maureen.
Yeah, no, we've had actually a lot of questions in regards to how this is going to affect the buy side. So in particular, there was kind of a two-part question here. What are the CAT impacts upon the buy side? And as a buy side firm, what should they be doing right now to prepare for this?
Maureen, would you like me to take that?
Sure.
So I think it's very important to remember that all of the buy-side activity is reflected in the CAT data. And so this will be subject to new scrutiny, as Shelley articulated. There's now a consolidated repository with consistent format. And so the regulators have easy access to this data, and they're required to start using it in their surveillance. And so it'll be far easier for the regulators to pick up any sorts of trading practices and patterns and more easily intervene. And so I think just understanding that there is this increased scrutiny on all trading patterns across the board, and especially that regulators can stitch together the data across broker dealers and across markets. And so I think that there's just that affords the regulators a level of scrutiny that they've never had before.
Okay, thanks. Shelley, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Or?
No, I think
No,
Judy hit it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, back to you, Eugene.
So just quickly on that point, should the buy side be scared or?
I think, if folks are abiding by the rules and regulations, you should not be scared. I think that's actually one aspect of CAT that's maybe a little underplayed. The hope is now that there's more accurate data and it's more available to regulators, the hope is actually that inquiries that are ultimately based on false positives on surveillance reports will in time be eliminated or reduced significantly. And so I think and ultimately, of course, this data and the oversight that it affords drives to the primary goal of making the markets more fair. And I think that benefits everyone.
So Shelley, you mentioned July 20th, and that's a pretty big milestone.
Yeah, so that represents the first time that options data from broker dealers, that the order data, so options trades occur on exchanges. This is the first time that broker dealers have had to report what happens to an order before it gets to an options exchange. So this is the initial receipt of the order, and then it may be routed from one broker dealer to another, or it's ultimately routed to the exchange where it will be executed. So like I said, on the equity side, FINRA has operated the OAT system for, I think about 20 years now. So it's not new at all on the equities. There's additional information, but for options, this is the first time. So that's a pretty big, one of the big game changers in CAT that is now actually a reality.
Okay. Then I guess we have another question from the audience.
Yes, this is a little bit of a long one, but it's also buy-side related. So Judy, I'm guessing this one's for you. So also, as more and more buy-side firms make use of outsourced trading desks or OTDs, what are the CAT reporting obligations if the OTD trader logs into a buy-side firm's order management system, essentially impersonating a buy-side trader at the firm? Does the CAT reporting change start in the buy-side firm's OMS, or does the change start when the order is routed from the OMS and received as a new order in the OTD's order execution management system? Did you get all that? It's a long
Okay.
question.
So I think there's a couple things embedded in that question. So first of all, it is important to remember that the only firms that have obligations to report to CAT on the industry side are in fact broker dealers. So in this example, the buy side would not have an obligation to do that reporting. The obligation would start when in fact that order was routed from the buy side to the sell side, and then it would be recorded as a new order and an order accept event. And so anything prior to that point wouldn't be reflected in CAT. And then the second thing to point out is, of course, the buy side firm is responsible for proper authentication of their traders and the use of their trading systems. And so that order would come through in an account that was recognized by the sell side firm. And so this would be something that I think the buy side would have to detect.
Okay, quickly, there was a question about the one of the deadlines, Maureen.
Yeah, they're asking, is CAT expected to be in production in its entirety by January 2021, or are there other deadlines over the next 2 to 3 years?
There are other deadlines. So maybe I'll just take a step back and lay out the broker-dealer implementation piece of this. So as I talked about, this year was the initial implementation for equities and options. Then in 2021, next year, will be the implementation path for the most complex part of the transaction data. So we have what we call phase 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D, and 2E. So there are 5 phases here. The first 2 go in this year. That 2A, 2B is what I've already talked about. Next year is what we call phase 2C and 2D. Phase 2C, which comes in April of next year, picks up most of the complexity on the equity side that didn't get picked up in 2A. These are additional representative order linkages when you get into the more complex order handling scenarios where orders are aggregated and disaggregated and average priced and just more complicated ways of dealing with certain kinds of order flow. All of that has to be linked. So the CAT plan, Rule 613 requires no matter whether you aggregate it, disaggregate it, use a representative order, all that has to ultimately, so you can go back to the customer that the original order or orders came from. Then the second half of next year will go into the 2D implementation, which is the second part of the options implementation. And as I mentioned, 2B is the simple electronic options. 2D is going to pick up the multi-leg complex orders, which, as everyone on this call I'm sure is very well aware, becomes pretty complicated pretty fast when you have to make sure it all links. And that can be electronic flow, manual flow also gets picked up there. So we've been having a lot of in-depth conversations with the industry about that. Paired orders have to get pulled in, all of the complexity. So next year will be as much work and time and energy that's gone in this year. Next year is going to be just as intense because of the complexity that we're layering on. And then the final phase 2E is the customer and account piece of this. That has to be fully implemented by July 2022. We already published the first spec on that the end of June. This is that portion of Rule 613 requires account information to be reported and customer information. And this is the part that's been highly discussed. I think there's been a lot of concern expressed by the industry when you get into the actual identity of customers, and this is natural persons and legal entities. So that initial spec has been published, so the industry can be looking at how we're going to capture that information, the formats, what kind of consistency checks are going to have to be done. There's a lot involved in that. So that spec doesn't have to be final until January 2022. So we have quite a bit of runway there to get that right because it's highly complex. So this is a multi-year implementation. The first part is probably the easiest part as we move into the harder parts of it. So hopefully that gets a better picture.
Yeah, and actually, Shelley, someone asked something when you were commenting back. They're asking, wouldn't this much reporting create additional cost, which will need to be baked into trade price, eventually increase spread or brokerage cost?
So the SROs will be are able to file a fee filing to the CAT NMS plan allows for CAT fees to be assessed against industry members. Of course, you know, how the industry members recoup their own fees would be a business decision. But the plan does allow for fees to be assessed to cover the costs of the CAT implementation, and the participant, the SROs themselves, and industry members. So any CAT reporter, the rule would allow. That would be a fee filing that would be subject to notice and comment through the whole SEC rulemaking process.
Okay, and we have another question. Actually, we have a great audience participation today, keeping us on our toes. So is this applicable for all U.S. trades or all trades by U.S.-based brokers, irrespective of countries they are trading in?
So I'm sorry, you broke up just a little bit.
Sorry, I can repeat it.
The very end, what was the very last thing you said?
Or all trades by U.S.-based brokers, irrespective of countries they're trading in.
So yes, all U.S. broker-dealers are subject to any order they receive. This gets like anything in CAT, there's little nuances depending on which asset class you're in, but for listed equities options, any order you receive as a U.S. broker-dealer, you have to report. If it's ultimately routed to a foreign market where it's executed, you would have to report the fact that you routed it to a foreign market. There are certain unlisted foreign scenarios where if the order is completely executed in the foreign market, you may or may not have an obligation depending if the trade has to be reported in the US. That would be the same as the OATS application today. But as a general matter, yes, all US broker-dealers that receive an order in a CAT reportable security, it would have to be reported.
Okay. As I mentioned, the FINRA CAT effort has had many phases and chapters, as I understand it, as of January 2019, FINRA took over as the plan processor for the CAT compliance effort. Can we talk a little bit about what that has meant, how that has changed things for participants? And if you might want to take that, Judy.
Sure. So we have seen a remarkable positive change after FINRA CAT became the plan processor. So the SROs, FINRA CAT, and industry members have been in a virtuous cycle of iterative deliverables and collaboration on fulfilling the plan. So FINRA CAT brings subject matter expertise, depth of resources, and leadership to the effort. And all of these capabilities have come together and resulted in improvements ranging from well-written policies and procedures to capable project management to delivery on specifications, and I would say better quality specifications and delivery on many components of a very large, complex distributed system.
Maureen, it looks like we have another question that has come in.
Yeah, we have a couple actually. I don't know which one to ask first. Could the panel members remind everybody of the CAT customer and account information system, so CAIS, and some of the obligations there? It's the separate system for submission of customer and account data.
Sure. So yeah, we're calling it CAT case, which is customer account information system. And this is that July 2022 implementation I was talking about. Actually, the case system is actually being rolled out in 2 phases as well. The first we call case LTID, basically large trader. That will actually open in month. We'll go to production in December, and beginning in April, if you have accounts with large traders, you will have to start reporting those to CAT beginning next April. This was done, and this part of case accelerated to help the industry satisfy its obligation with large trader phase 3. So that's why that's coming in. It's a pretty, hopefully, straightforward implementation. It's your reporting in the CAT lingo. An account is represented by what we call a firm designated ID or an FDID. So you will enable all your FDIDs that have an LTID associated with them. You will have to report that FDID. You'll have to report the effective date or account open date essentially, and then the LTIDs that go with it. And that's about it. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Then the second piece of case will be the full implementation. That's what that June 30 spec we just published covers. That is the full complement of information required under the plan. So you'll build out a little bit more on your FDIDs. Things like, account types, there's various different pieces of information in there that won't be captured in the LTID piece. And then the customer information, and that's the name, the address, your role on the account. One thing to keep in mind with case and the customer reporting requirements is a customer under CAT is defined as either an account holder or an authorized trader. They are both considered customers, and the full suite of information has to be reported for both. So I think people might want to start focusing on that and making sure they have all the information that they're going to have to report on authorized traders as well as account holders. There's also, if you take a look at that June 30 spec, there's been much concern over capturing, particularly with natural persons, social security numbers. So remember, like I was talking earlier, the whole point of CAT, or one of the main points of CAT, is to be able to track trading by a single customer across all the broker dealers they're trading through and all the markets they're trading on. So you can correlate their activity. So that means you have to be able to have a customer identified uniquely by that will result in unique identification in CAT, regardless of how many broker dealers submit information on that customer. So for a natural person, social security is that unique identifier. But for obvious security concerns, the participants filed for exemptive relief. There's an exemptive order that the SEC issued that allows them to do this CCID alternative approach, CCID meaning CAT customer identifier, which would be what represents social security number. And there is a two-step transformation process where you essentially transform the social so it doesn't ever leave your broker dealer. It gets further transformed to an irreversible number inside CAT. So there's a lot of security. We could talk for 3 hours about that. So I know I've been going on quite a bit here, but that is, I know there's been a lot of focus on that, and that's what we're going to be spending so much time on. We need the industry to focus on, switch from as much as they can, share their focus between transaction and this customer and account data, because it is new, it's brand new, right? We haven't reported things like this before. There'll be a lot to work out. I don't know, Judy, if any of the highlights, or I feel like I've been going on for quite a while there. There's a lot
I think
to talk
absolutely. Absolutely. I think you did hit the highlights, and I would like to pick up on one of those themes, is that because it's a very new requirement to be pulling data from the back office and publishing it on a daily basis, or reporting it on a daily basis to a regulator. And so I think there are a lot of operational challenges in that, and the beginning stages of some data collection, and certainly a data cleansing effort, is going to be need to be a tremendous focus across the industry so that the data is reported accurately. And so that can't be underestimated. I think the technical challenges of this phase are a little bit less, but the operational challenges are much, much more.
Quickly, Judy, now that I have your attention, the cloud is playing a big role in all of this. How would you assess the cloud computing technologies, how it's working and how it may work going forward?
Well, Shelley, do you want to take that from the perspective of the plan processor, and then I can follow on and talk a little bit about it from the broker-dealer side?
Sure, sure. So FINRA CAT uses AWS, and that's where we run all the processing, the storage. Primarily, one of the biggest reasons is the scalability. The data footprint, as everyone I'm sure can imagine, and we publish stats on this weekly on the broker-dealer side, the volumes are very, very large. The exchanges and the participants themselves and FINRA's TRF, like I said, have been reporting since November of 2018. That volume is a couple 100 billion records a day. It peaked earlier this year with all the volatility. We exceeded 400 billion records on a single day. So we went from, half of that to 400 billion in, days, about a week. So you have to be able, the scalability factor is paramount. So the cloud lets us do that. And then of course, when the volume goes back down to normal, then you can scale back down. And just our partner AWS and the different kinds of tools that they have that allow you to work with very, very large footprints. Broker-dealers, we have broker-dealers that use AWS Direct Connect, can transmit directly into through an AWS account to ours. So there's a lot of benefits, and just for a project like this with the footprint that we're dealing with, the broker-dealer volume is about 15 billion a day. You really need a highly scalable solution, and that's what AWS provides. Judy, I don't know if you want to.
So I think the importance of having highly scalable compute resources are as important on the broker-dealer side. And that certainly is a huge benefit that the cloud can bring to CAT reporting infrastructure. I think other things to just highlight is, one, if you are in AWS already, there's very easy transmission of data to FINRA CAT. Also, though, there's also other technical benefits, such as better support for experimentation, better support for building up and tearing down test environments or environments parallel to production, which is really important through these phased rollouts. And some firms really experienced a benefit if they were cloud-based in their CAT processing with the pandemic, not needing to rely upon on-site resources or hot hands resources at data centers. And so there are a lot of benefits to cloud computing. I think that's very typical for any computing in the cloud, and it applies equally well to CAT processing.
So, Maureen, we do have a lot of questions. So, do you want me to handle some of them, or do you want?
You guys are keeping us on our toes. I'm trying to manage them as best I can when they come in.
My thought was that maybe we could just hit them fast.
Hit them fast. All right. So should we start at the top here?
Sure.
I might be going backwards a little bit. We have a couple of buy-side questions, but as a buy-side, do I need to change the fixed data tags that I send to my brokers? For example, pre-trade sub-account allocations. Do I need to be aware of what broker dealers are using as my FDID?
So
and
I think
it's fixed the FIX, just so people understand. It's FIX, the system. Okay.
So I think the most prudent thing is to work directly with the sell side on any potential changes that might need to be made. And I think there are some occasions where there are going to be changes needed to be made, either for the allocation data or more generally for, I think, the collection of some of the account information that's going to be reported to case. So the safest thing is to reach out to the sell side and ask what they need. And generally, though, of course, broker-dealers try to insulate their clients from having to make significant or dramatic changes. But it is a partnership, and there are times when we do need to ask for new or different information.
Okay, and I'll follow up with one more buy-side question. Where is it? Okay, as a buy-side, do I need to worry about data security? I don't know if I'm jumping ahead too much here, as some of my information would be submitted as part of CAIS Phase 2E.
So I think it's important for everybody to be aware of data security concerns, and that's at wherever the data lives. So whether it's at a broker dealer or at FINRA CAT or at the SROs. And I think so that general awareness and scrutiny of the data security practices and procedures is very important, because this data is exceptionally valuable, and both the transaction data as well as the account information that's going to be submitted to CAT. Now, it's a good time to talk a little bit about furthering what Shelley has said about the CAT customer ID, the CCID. I do think that the biggest concerns early on were with sensitive PII data. And I think that the combination of security experts from the regulators and FINRA CAT and the SEC came up with an incredibly creative solution to that problem to allow the identification of customers and not require the handling and storage of sensitive PII data. And I think from the perspective of identity theft, I think that collectively we've done a wonderful job in just sidestepping that, that exposure. That said, I think that same vigilance needs to be, certainly FINRA CAT has reached a gold standard with their data security program and practices. And I think it's something that they have devoted a lot of time and energy to great benefit to. And I think that same sort of scrutiny needs to be paid to when the data is extracted from FINRA CAT, such as when the SROs bulk download data. And that's where, again, those same security concerns come into being. Now, I will also note, though, that the account information cannot be bulk downloaded. So that is stored separately, and it has separate higher security requirements protecting it.
Okay.
And I would just note that if any interested and hasn't had a chance to take a look, there is on catnmsplan.com, the CAT website. The participants have done 2 different security webinars that are out there recorded that you can go take a look at. That describes the security system and process in more detail for FINRA CAT, and then the participants talk about theirs. So I would suggest anyone who's interested take a look at that. And we can't emphasize enough, Judy just made a very important point, that the case system and the transaction data, the plan requires a strict segregation of those 2 systems. And there is very tight standards and procedures around who can access case in what scenarios. So they are kept separate. So they're 2 separate implementations, 2 separate specs. So they are, because it is such data, a great deal of effort has gone into making sure those are separate, and there are very strict and tight controls around that.
And Shelley, if I could just jump in, I would recommend those security webinars. Have your CISOs watch them, and I think you'll learn a lot of good information.
Okay, so Marnie, we're going to tackle some of the other questions that have come in.
I think so. I think we should address, we have some questions that we haven't gotten to yet, but I think it's best to see what's on top of mind for the audience. So we'll just continue going on. When will the customer account data attributes start reporting to FINRA CAT?
So as I mentioned, the very first part of this, the large trader LTID, case LTID, which is very minimum, a number of data points there. That the test opens in August, production opens in December, and then that is fully implemented in April. So that's the very beginning. You'll have your FDI, any FDID with an LTID will be starting to be reported then. But then for the full, all of the more sensitive, the customer name, address, all that we've been talking about, the test opens for that in January of 2020.
Oops.
By 2022.
Okay, you cut out a little bit at the end there.
Fully, my internet connection is unstable.
That's okay. A hurricane, so.
We're living in unstable times.
Yeah, exactly. Everything's unstable. The full reporting of customer and account data will be July 2022.
Okay. All right, great. Which question we got?
I'm trying to go in what makes sense here. For what
I would just go, okay.
Yeah, for what duration will sorry, I'm just trying to reword it as I read it. For what duration will FINRA be keeping and analyzing this data? A week, a year, a decade? Is there a plan or archiving, purging of older data, or to continue to store it as we continue? And then there's a second part. I think they're asking both at FINRA's end and at the broker-dealer's end.
Well, I can just take what the plan requirement is for the plan processor in terms of data retention. Each individual SRO, I'm not speaking for FINRA SRO, I'm speaking for FINRA CAT, the plan processor. The plan requires the plan processor to maintain 6 years of data in a readily accessible way for regulators to use, and then has requirements for how that data is eliminated at the end of the 6 years. So that's all per the NMS plan. So on the processor, 6 years.
And then on the broker-dealer side, there are specifically for the CAT reports, broker-dealers are required to retain it, and I believe that's for 5 years. But that is in addition to the existing 17A4 requirements that vary based on the actual records, whether it needs to be retained 1, 3, or 5 years. So there are very specific data retention requirements on broker-dealers.
Okay. Maureen, can I jump in?
You go for it, Eugene.
Okay. So Judy, there's been a pandemic, lockdown. And how has that complicated CAT compliance efforts? Maybe you cannot speak about your own firm, but for the sell side, how has it affected them?
So just generally, while there's never a good time for a pandemic, the timing of the outbreak in the US was uniquely challenging for the go live of the very first phase 2A, which was the first time the sell side firms were reporting to CAT. So the pandemic hit just as firms were preparing their final releases and honing their operational procedures. Due to the pandemic, as everybody knows, and the market reactions to it, the market experienced at least 2 times, if not more, high water mark volumes, as well as dramatic increases in volatility. And so in addition, firms were either preparing to shift their staff to work from home, their staff and their traders to work from home. And this presents a uniquely challenging work environment. So all this came together just a month, about 4 to 6 weeks prior to the CAT reporting requirement. So within firms, there's steep competition for resources. The CAT project, keeping our systems stable so we could participate fully in the marketplace, and transitioning staff to work from home, all during remarkable volatility in the markets. And so I think that because of that, the advisory committee and FIF went to the SEC and asked for an extension. Ultimately, an extension was granted, and the first 2 deadlines, phase 2A and 2B, were pushed back 2 months, but no other deadlines were changed. And I think based on the relatively low error rate, so well under projections, and I think typically under 3%, I think that has shown that the industry has, in fact, met this big challenge and met it well. And we are deeply appreciative of the additional time that was given. I think it was completely necessary. And again, our focus needed to be in that moment on keeping our system stable and the market stable.
Do we want to attempt a question from our audience?
Sure. Lots of acronyms in all of these questions, so please bear with me. Since
That's
CAT,
what CAT's about, acronyms.
oh my gosh, I haven't heard of some of these, but since CAT includes OATS and Blue Sheet LTID data, is there an expectation that OATS and Blue Sheet reporting will be retired? Is there an anticipated time frame?
So the plan does require that the SROs look to eliminate duplicative systems. Of course, oats and blue sheets are that in that category, absolutely. So FINRA SRO will be doing filings about their oats retirement timeframes. I think blue sheets is out a little bit further, given that that coincides with case. That's what would get you an allocation reporting, but definitely that is in the plan and it's required under the NMS plan.
Okay.
And for the CAIS reporting, I guess it's CAS reporting, do you see broker-dealers partnering with clearing firms or custodians for their reporting versus the reporting agents who submit the transaction data?
I don't know, Judy, if you might have a good perspective.
Sure, I can jump in on that. I think that we have consistently seen that there's just a variety of ways to perform CAT reporting, whether people utilize CAT reporting agents or do self-reporting, and often larger firms have a mix of reporting mechanisms for CAT. And so I think that Ks will be very similar. Certainly, the broker-dealers are going to have to work with the clearing firms where they're not self-clearing to effectively report this data. And in fact, the allocation information is only required to be reported from the clearing brokers. And so, but there are active discussions, and right now there's very active planning so that collectively the information can be reported correctly.
Okay, great. And another question that came in earlier, are there additional milestones for other products such as fixed income instruments?
So the plan does require that after all of the equities and options are fully implemented, that the participants start focusing on what additional products could be reported after. I would encourage anyone to look at the plan about the timing of when the SROs or the participants have to start considering other products, but the plan does contemplate that there would be other products in the future.
Okay, thanks. And which regulators aside from FINRA will have access to CAT data?
So the plan, the NMS plan, provides that all of the participants have access to the CAT data and incorporate it into their regulatory programs. I would just note that it is restricted to only regulatory use. So participants, only their regulatory staff are allowed access to the CAT data, but it's all strictly governed by the plan itself about who is allowed access under what circumstances.
So just to jump in plain English, that's every options exchange, every equity exchange, FINRA, and the SEC.
Okay, perfect. Eugene, I'll pass back over to you and we'll save some of these questions towards the end. Okay.
We've talked about some of the very obvious benefits of the CAT system for the regulators and for investors and for safer markets. But are there some other benefits that might be spin-off from the CAT initiative? And I'm thinking of within a firm, there's this competition for resources, but maybe getting ready for the CAT initiative may have some other IT benefits and some operational benefits. So are there any spin-off benefits here that firms can look at and favorably?
So I do think that in preparing to report to CAT, it did provide a very concrete motivation and a concrete deadline for work that maybe could not be sponsored or supported before in terms of the data processing life cycle. And I think a lot of firms actually took it upon themselves to not just make an add-on to their oats reporting, but to start fresh and to design a system from ground up to the new regulatory reporting requirements. And I know a lot of firms could not have supported a rewrite of OATs, but did have the funding to support the new requirement for CAT. And so I think that there are a lot of added benefits to that. So I think that looking at CAT reporting from the point of view of data governance and applying some of those principles from the beginning of that project does in fact have powerful benefits, not just for CAT reporting, but for a firm's own self-surveillance and for their own middle and back office activities. And I think those are within the firm, I think something that I think is very powerful. And I don't know that could have been motivated in any other way. I think outside of the firms, I would want to highlight one thing that I don't think we've talked about yet. So I think having data readily available to the regulators to support their decision-making, particularly the SEC, can only drive to better decisions and better rulemaking. And I think ultimately that's our additional hope, that we see that benefit too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and we've touched on some of the data security issues that are cropping up because of the CAT process, but what are some data security strategies that sell-side firms may need to adopt as they're shipping, important data to the exchanges, the SROs, and the regulators? And we have talked about some of the things that CAT has done already. But
sure. So I think it's important to realize that the plan and therefore the requirements for data submission is very strictly prescribed for broker dealers, and it's according to best practices. So data needs to be encrypted at rest and in transit, and it needs to be transmitted over either secure lines or via the secure transmission afforded by the CAT Reporter portal. And so we talked a lot, one of the other things to highlight here is we talked a lot about already avoiding having firms process and collect and process sensitive PII information. And so that, in fact, has dramatically reduced the risk and therefore the concerns of data security by not having sell-side firms having to handle that very sensitive PII data. So that's an important, we essentially, avoided that completely. And I think as a more general observation, I think as sell-side firms have prepared for the security discussions and helped forge these solutions, I think that increased review and awareness is only positive. And of course, firms naturally turn that inside. And I think it's just important to remember to apply the basic cybersecurity fundamentals wherever the data resides, and so that we can protect the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of the data.
And Shelley, do you have any thoughts on data security strategies?
I think Judy hit most of the highlights, or the really important highlights. I mean, I would just reiterate, that security is a top priority, and assure everyone how much time, effort, and resources are put into security. It can't overemphasize it. And constantly looking at state of the art, everything Judy hit on. Beyond that, just to let everyone know, we take it very, very seriously.
Okay. Maureen, do you want to?
Sure, we'll ask another one from the audience. This might be a basic question. There are no basic questions, audience. Everyone knows, but what are the penalties we're talking about if anyone misses reporting timelines or data quality is below the threshold quality? What's the action plan, especially for a large set of smaller brokers who were not part of OATs reporting?
Well, that's really, a question that would be best handled by the regulators themselves. I would note, though, that FINRA CAT and the SROs jointly hosted a webinar, I believe it was last week, talking about the compliance program and how the different regulatory obligations have been split up between the SROs for those who are maybe not FINRA members. And so I would invite anyone to go to the CAT NMS plan and look for that webinar. It's recorded, and they walk through, there's a 17D2 agreement, how the different responsibilities have been, what the regulator's perspective is on this at this point.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Could we talk a little bit about the interfirm linkage and why that's so important to the CAT initiative? And I think
Sure.
Shelley, you had talked about that before.
Judy,
So just to,
yeah.
I'll jump in. So I'll just add to what you said already. So the interfirm linkage, so the ability to, and it's often called the daisy chain approach, the ability to essentially link together every single hop an order might see, and if its life cycle, is fundamental to see for the regulators to have that comprehensive view of how an order is handled by every broker dealer. And so and this is deeply challenging to broker dealers for a couple of reasons. So one, the way the linkages are made is actually different in CAT than it is in OATS. So CAT is after an exact link, whereas OATS had an approximate link. The other real technical challenge behind this is for every broker dealer, you need to look at all of your inbound sessions and all of your outbound sessions, and you need to be able to correctly describe both the order ID you're receiving as well as the broker ID, the broker dealer and their identifier. And so while there's requirements and a hierarchy around this, a lot of it will ultimately come down to these bilateral negotiations between broker dealers to decide how they want to represent those fields, the order ID and their firm identifier. And those are painstaking and time consuming. And so one help to this though, and Shelley mentioned this earlier, is what's going live in production next week, is essentially verifications on these linkages in the production environment, but without penalty of regulatory action. So we have until, starting next week, we'll have until the end of October to work with our counterparties and make sure that those identifiers are in sync and exactly match up so all the linkages can happen. But this has been well known for a long time to be one of the biggest challenges, certainly, of the 2A and 2B reporting.
Okay. And then I guess as we're coming to the end of the hour, what are some like the long-term changes in operations and workflow and beyond that will that the sell side will have to come to grips with, and of course the buy side too? And I'm thinking of requirements for accurate, complete data, efficient data mining, data governance issues, and maybe even more front office involvement.
So I think all of those things are true. So the increased requirement for accurate and complete data and very detailed modeling of the order handling scenarios is really unprecedented in CAT. And so that changes the bar for data governance from capture to storage and at every layer of management. I think that one of the important things that you mentioned in addition is that there does need to be more front office involvement with key groups so that as trading strategies change, that the workflows are accurately reflected in CAT. And that's a very high bar to have that in place ahead of production trading. I think the other aspect of this is if a firm, there's sort of two other things to highlight. If you have a large firm and if a firm is operating at significant reporting volumes to CAT raises the bar to the level that you really need to automate most of your operational tasks for monitoring, alerting, and error correction. And that really strongly leans you to the effective and efficient use of data mining and big data tools to provide for that type of accuracy and efficiency. On the flip side, for small broker-dealers or broker-dealers who are reporting at low volumes, there's the challenge of needing to address that in a cost-effective way. And while there are some tools, and the CAT Reporter portal is probably the primary tool for those broker-dealers, and that will continue to evolve, I think I think small broker-dealers need to figure out that cost-effective balance of doing their self-surveillance and doing it in an effective way.
Maureen, do we have any more burning questions?
I think we've covered most of them. I think we have one more maybe buy-side related question I might be able to combine, and then we can close things out. Does that work for everybody?
Okay.
This might be for Judy, but like Kat, are we seeing a need for buy-side reporting or buy-side clients as well? And in addition to increased scrutiny of trading patterns, are there any other impacts on buy-side firms?
Okay, so I think the first part probably is a solid question for regulators. And I think after they've had a chance to consume the CAT data and see how how the results of their newly found surveillance, I think that there'll need to be decisions made about whether they need more data. But I would think that would probably take years to get to that point, because there is just so much more information in the data that's being made available in CAT that I can't anticipate that happening in the near term. And then I think the second part of that question, does there need to be awareness beyond trading patterns? And so I think awareness about, I mentioned this before, I do think working with the sell side and making sure all your account information and allocation information is accurate, and when there are changes made, reflecting that to the sell side, those are some important new requirements and procedures that need to go in place because of, again, the stringent requirements on accuracy and correction of data.
Okay, great. Does that wrap it up there, Eugene?
I think so. Unless Shelley or Judy, you have any final thoughts, any summaries?
The only final thing I would say is that, and Judy's alluded to, and that the error rates far surpassed the quality, that I think we were expecting. The industry is doing a tremendous job rolling this out and really engaging, and we're, from our perspective, very pleased with how it's gone so far.
And I would like to highlight that I think there has been unprecedented collaboration between the industry and the SROs and FINRA CAT. And I think ultimately that is what has resulted in these very, very low error rates. And so I think that all of that work and effort from on all sides, and that willingness to understand these very complex trading patterns, I think has resulted in these low error rates and high level of compliance.
And I would like to congratulate myself for not making any cheap cat jokes.
You just did, Eugene.
Well done, well done, Eugene.
On that note, thank you both so much for joining us today and participating as our guests, and thank the attendees. After this is our 6th episode and has been the chattiest group so far, which has been really great. Thank you for keeping us all on our toes. And for those who are in compliance or more regulatory roles, I know there were a lot of you out there today. Our next coffee break might be of interest to you, where we're going to be talking about our clearinghouse is safe for derivatives trading. We have put a link in there for you to register your convenience, but we will be sending out an email after this as well with the link for the recording should you want to send it to any colleagues or watch it again. I know there was a lot of information here today, so we want to thank everybody and Eugene for today's episode, and we hope to see everybody in person sometime soon.
Thank you, Judy and Shelley. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.